your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy post-Halloween to all of you who celebrate. First day of November. We got daylight savings ending this weekend. Got to fall back, get an extra hour of sleep, or if you are like me in our household, an extra hour of nonsense. I'm sure we'll be up just as early, and then it'll just be worse for that day. But however you celebrate, enjoy the day and enjoy the show coming up. Great one. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a minute. So does Sarah McLellan from the Star Tribune. Got a twofer today, covering the Wolves and the Wild. Both of them have nice big games tonight, home games. Wolves against Denver, a rematch of last year's Western Conference semifinals. The Wild taking on Tampa Bay after playing Tampa Bay on the road earlier this season and having a nice showing. Wild off to a great start. Wolves off to an okay start. We'd like to see more from them, especially in this game against Denver. So Chris and I will get into the Wolves. Sarah and I will get into the Wild here in just a little bit. Some Thursday night football to get to at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Got an email from listener Tim, reader Tim, who I don't think we should dismiss this because I think this is how more and more people are feeling about sports these days. He says, Michael, just wanted to say I really appreciated your article today. The ridiculous spending in baseball has ruined the sport for me. As a kid growing up, I couldn't miss one pitch on the radio listening to Herb Carneal and Halsey Hall. Forgive me if I butchered the spelling of their names. I think he did pretty well. Today, with the imbalance of team payroll, it just seems like it should be a 4-team league. Why bother? There is this narrative out there that somehow for the game to survive, the Yankees need to be part of the World Series. The Dodgers are also viewed similarly. I didn't watch 1 minute of the World Series and only a handful of Twins games this year. I just don't care anymore. College sports is now also ruined for me for many of the same reasons. In any case, my ranting will not change anything, but your article may eventually reach someone of power who might realize this is not good for the game. Thanks for reading my diatribe, Tim. Now, I think this is absolutely true. I'm feeling this way, particularly about baseball. Like I wrote about and talked about yesterday, how the imbalance in payroll in baseball is just making it so that there's such a massive competitive imbalance. The teams that spend the most make the playoffs. The teams with the 6 highest payrolls this past season all made the postseason. The team with the largest payroll, which is the Dodgers, even if they won't show up in all the payroll tables as having the largest payroll because they are backloading Shohei Ohtani's contract to the tune of $68 million more, basically, that they're paying him this year than what they're showing on the payroll. Their payroll is well above $300 million. So is the Yankees, but the Dodgers had the biggest one. They are the winners of the World Series. You spend your way to a championship. Not to say they didn't earn it on the field with the way their players played, but it is far easier to win when you can spend that big, and it is not fair that they are able to spend 2 or 3 times as much as everybody else because their TV revenue is 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10 times as much as everybody else. You realize that they are getting an average of $334 million. This was according to Sports Business Journal. $334 million every year, an average of that every year for their local TV contract through 2038. It is an unbelievable deal. They signed it like 10 years ago before the bubble. It's ironclad. It's locked in. $334 million a year. You think that goes a long way towards being competitive? Yeah, I think maybe that goes a long way to explaining why they have been so good. So to Tim's point, what does this do if you are a fan? It does exactly the same thing that Tim's talking about. It makes you not care because you don't think the team you are rooting for, unless they are one of the chosen few, can win. I think that's starting to happen in college sports a little bit with NIL money, with now we're going to go to teams having essentially salary caps and the schools will manage it. Maybe that'll make it a little bit better, but I do feel like the haves are getting more and the have-nots are getting less, and that is not going to be good for sports. So thank you, Tim, for raising that flag one more time. I don't know that it's going to necessarily change anything because these owners, these teams are making money hand over fist still. They haven't hit a bubble yet. I just saw a note the other day that all 32 NHL teams are now worth at least $1 billion. That means every team in the 4 major North American pro sports leagues is valued at least $1 billion now. That is bonkers to me. All 4 Minnesota teams certainly are. The Vikings are up over $5 billion. Now all the NFL teams are over $5 billion in valuations. Like this is far outpacing anything else in a lot of the business world and any other walk of life. So these teams are still making tons of money, generating tons of value on their franchises. So I don't see that changing anytime soon unless the TV revenue starts to go down. Now, will it go down at some point? Yeah, it's starting to in some places, but that hasn't had an impact yet. I will be fascinated to see where this is 10 or 20 years from now. But I was predicting some kind of bubble 10 years ago, and obviously that has not happened yet. And really quick, kind of a prescript, a foreword to my conversations with Chris Hine and Sarah McLellan. It kind of occurs to me that we want to know what these two teams, the Wild and Wolves, what they're going to be like right away. We want answers right away. We don't want to be patient. We go into the season thinking, okay, we're going to give them some time to figure this out. We're going to kind of suss this out. And if they start a little bit slow, the sky is falling. If they start really fast, we want to know if they can keep it up, if this is for real. Things like that. So that's where we are with the Wolves and Wild. I still don't think we know who the Wolves are, certainly after 4 games into the season. We still don't know who the Wild are 9 games into the season. I think the Wolves are going to be okay. I think the Wild are going to be better than I thought. I think the Wolves are still a 50 to 55 win team. I think they're a competitor, someone in the West that can make some noise in the playoffs, but we just don't know. We want all the information right now, but sometimes with these teams, we just have to be patient, and I think that's where conversations like these with Chris Hine and Sarah McLellan help to give us some perspective, kind of tell us, hey, here's the lay of the land. It's early, but here's what's going on so far. So I hope you enjoy both of these conversations. Let's talk Wolves today. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune joins me. Chris, big home game Friday against Denver. It feels like it's just the playoff reunion, right? They played Dallas on Tuesday, lost in maybe all too familiar fashion with Luka and Kyrie making big shots down the stretch. But overall, 2-2. What do you make of the start to this season so far?
They feel like they should be 2-2. I think there's been some good things and some things that they really need to address over those 4 games. I think the rebounding reared its head the other night. The transition defense reared its head, and those are problems that they've had in the past. And I think that with Cat not there, and with incorporating Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo into the mix, it's trying to figure out how this all works and how these areas all work with them in there with them. I think without Cat, you are going to have to have the likes of Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels and DiVincenzo and Conley and all the guards rebound more, be a little more focused on it. And I think that was lacking. If you go back and look at some of Dallas's offensive boards the other night, that's where the main problems were, not from the front court guys specifically. Transition defense, that's all about communication. That's all about getting on the same page, I feel like. And, with maybe a couple film sessions where you point out the issues, I think that can be corrected, hopefully fairly easily for them. But, this is still very much a team that's figuring out its way early on, and it might take a quarter of the season or so before the pieces really start to come together. You can see glimpses of it, especially on the offensive end. I think Julius Randle's looked pretty good over these first 4 games. Leads the team in assists, and he seems to be doing what Chris Finch and he said he was going to when he arrived, which is, yes, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot, but he does create out of that. And, how many times have we seen him over those first 4 games back somebody down, take up a decent chunk of the shot clock, but then he zooms a pass out to an open shooter for an open look from 3. So if the end goal is to get good open looks, Julius Randle has been contributing that, and he's been scoring at a pretty good rate. So I think he's been fitting in well so far. It's some of the other areas that they need to address, I feel like, just from a chemistry standpoint now that Cat isn't here anymore.
Why have they struggled rebounding? Like you said, I think it is more on the backcourt, the wings. They seem to have guys who should be good and willing rebounders. Like Conley's a little small, but like everybody else is like decent size. They're athletic. Like what's the disconnect? Is it focus?
Oh, you got it.
Is
You
it
got it.
maturity? What is it?
I think it is focus. You can go back and see like there are a couple clips where, like PJ Washington just goes right around Ant, who's not really paying attention to where PJ Washington is, and he goes in and he gets the rebound, right? Some of those were Derek Lively, also being Derek Lively, and he's a very good player and was able to just kind of out jump or whatever you want to say some of the Wolves. But I think it is attention to detail. It is focusing on it, making it a priority, making sure you're boxing out, and that you are being physical in that area. And sometimes that's just easier said than done. Sometimes on a given night, you're not as dialed in or focused. Jaden has always, I think with him, you have to take his rebounding numbers with a grain of salt because he's always guarding, sometimes or the best players or the person that ends up taking the shot. So he might not be always in ideal position to rebound, but with some of the other guys, it's really is just making sure you're being physical, and literally just boxing out. So,
I don't imagine this is going to change when they play Denver, but Chris Finch has had a pretty tight rotation, especially as they try to figure out kind of who plays well together, how this all fits together. You've seen Joe Ingles generally be that ninth guy. He's not playing a ton of minutes, but as he kind of like works his way into 5-10 minute spurts over a couple different rotations in the game. I'd love to see some of the younger guys. Royce would too. I think a lot of other fans would. Again, I don't expect that to happen against Denver necessarily, and maybe we will see them more as the season goes along. But it is interesting that the trade gives them two players in the rotation instead of one, and there's just not room, at least in the way they want to go about things right now, for Josh Minot, Terrence Shannon, Rob Dillingham, Luka Garza. None of those guys are getting any sorts of run so far.
Nope, they're not, and I wouldn't expect them to as long as this top 8 is playing as well as it is. And what I mean by that is, guys 6, 7, and 8. DiVincenzo, they're going to be giving a long runway to get acclimated, and he's going to be playing major minutes. Naz Reid, you're not going to be taking his minutes away, right? And Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been their most consistent player through 4 games so far. He's earned 25 minutes a night as well. So that's what they're running into right now, I think, is guys 6 through 8 are really good. That's the problem.
They arguably have the best 6 through 8 in the league, don't you think?
They do. I was reading Yahoo Sports' predictions for NBA awards, and people had both Naz Reid and DiVincenzo as 6th man of the year potential award winners. Like no other team, I feel like can boast that.
Yeah. And I felt like Na was like the 7th man of the year last year, if there was such an award.
Exactly, and he's been great this year. Like
yes,
he closed the other night. He was so good. So I think that's where you're running into the issue, is that because they have a very good first 3 coming off the bench, it's hard to say for Chris Finch to say who should be playing less minutes. Or fewer minutes. It's a good problem to have. If you're only going to run somebody out there for 5 minutes a night as that 9th person, I would give Minot the run. He showed enough in the preseason.
Why not?
Right?
Why
I agree. Why not? I would give him a look, and just especially if you're losing, if you're struggling, whatever, maybe he can come in with his energy and change the game a little bit, And if you need help rebounding, that is one of the things that he can do at a very high level. So I think that's who I would be picking for that kind of 9th, 8.5/ spot, right now. But Chris Finch likes his veterans, and he has a very Tom Thibodeauian streak in him of playing his guys major minutes. So I don't know when that's going to change, and it might take an injury to jolt the rotation for a temporary amount of time.
Yeah, the concern I have too is that they seemed to wear down last year by the time they got to the conference finals, and maybe everybody does, but it's just workload type stuff. They seem like they have enough bodies that they shouldn't have to overextend anybody. They shouldn't have to overextend Ant. They shouldn't have to be working these guys too hard. And again, it's early in the season. They probably have the capability of doing that, and they're trying to get as much continuity, as many minutes together as possible. So maybe this is a short-term thing. But if we get to game 60 and Ant is still playing 40 minutes a game, even in other, not neck and neck type games, I worry about that. Even if Ant wants to be out there all the time.
Yeah, it's a concern, but I don't know that. I think it was more the Denver series that took it out of him, not just the long march to the late May. I was wondering if Ant's minutes were going to go down, especially after he had a 24-point first quarter the other night. And he kind of got back into, I think it was 37 the other night. He had been playing 40. So I think that is something that Finch is going to be monitoring. And he had mentioned that before Tuesday's game, that he wanted to make sure Ant wasn't, they weren't overextending Ant. So that is something I think that you can expect is Ant to stay like 36, 37. He was very deliberate about when he brought him back in the second quarter the other night. And I thought, just given off of the first quarter that Ant had, that he was going to be back in around like the 9-minute mark again in the second quarter, but it was more like closer to the 6-minute mark. So, I think he's cognizant of that. With Mike Conley, he's been struggling through the first 4 games here. That's enabled him to keep his minutes down. When you put Nikhil out there to close the game over Mike, he said he's been dealing with a wrist thing for a while now. He was dealing with it last year. It didn't affect him. But we'll see if maybe we get to ask him today if that maybe affected his preparation at all in the off season. We'll see if we can get some more clarity on that. But they're confident with him that his shots will start falling. Finch pointed to a lot of in and outs for him from 3-point range. So maybe they're seeing something on their advanced technology about whether those shots should be going in or not, but they're not seemingly worried about what Mike Conley or where he'll end up eventually this season.
Well, I'm glad they're not. I'm a little worried about him. I mean, obviously, anytime anytime you have a veteran player who's meant so much to you, like, you get to a certain age where the decline can happen more quickly than when you're 29, right? Like, you kind of know what you're getting, relatively speaking, from a physical standpoint at, kind of 25 to 31, something like that. You don't so much when you get to be Conley's age. So I'm a little concerned about his slow start, just because you do see guys drop off, and if he starts to fall off, they don't have that kind of, that I know DiVincenzo, but they don't necessarily have all the answers if he's not what they hoped he was.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's, to your point, I think DiVincenzo is that, but yeah, this team is relying on him to be the version of himself from last season, or close to it, if they're going to be a serious contender in any way.
And you think 20 games, that's a good kind of, not just for him, but just for the whole squad, just like
I think that's just in general to figure out, just even with any team where you're at. Like, that's the first kind of mile marker of the season,
Yeah.
So I think that's reasonable to think. And we've seen it before, with Finch teams, it takes that long sometimes for things to click in. He often says the offense takes 20 games to click in, and I think they're going to have enough talent that they're going to be able to win a decent number of games over that stretch of time, but I don't think they're going to truly start really hitting their stride potentially until that point. I think you've seen enough glimpses of positive things to think that they're going to be able to figure it out and get there. I think defensively, it's been a little more of a struggle than maybe anticipated. Yep. I thought they did okay in the half-court defense, especially in the second half last night, and it was or 2 nights ago. It really was the rebounding that killed them in the second half. but that's a part of it. And cleaning that up was a big reason why they were the number one defense last year. They were a good rebounding team. They were above average, and whereas in previous years they had been one of the worst. So they have to get back to at least being, top 10-ish on the defensive end, because they do play good enough half-court defense, and I think they will, even with this new configuration, that as long as they clean up most of their possessions, they're going to be a very good defensive team overall.
I think that's fair, and I think they're kind of about what I expected through the first 4 games. I think people they want them to be great right away, right? Like everybody wants them to be great right, because last season was great just because you see the talent, but it probably is going to take a little while. I think the encouraging thing, like you said, is I think Randall's been pretty good so far. Like the fit has been not seamless, especially that very first game against the Lakers, but I think overall it's been more the players around him and less him that have been a little bit more concerning.
I think you're right. I think you're right there. I think he hasn't been the top of your concerns through four games, and I think you'd probably take that 2 weeks ago if we had told you that. But remember last year's team started 1-2 with a terrible loss in Atlanta. So it was the sky was falling at this point last year. Yes. The sky was falling. Finch.
I think I wrote if Cat keeps playing like this, they're going to have to trade him. And then they won their next 13 to 15. They were they got to 16-4 after starting 1-2, I think. So they turned it on pretty quick last year. So we'll see where it all gets them. Big game Friday against Denver, rematch of last year's Western Conference semifinals. Chris Hine, appreciate it. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Good stuff from Chris. And I will say this, for tonight's matchup against Denver, I do think the Wolves are less equipped right now to play Denver than they were last year when they had Karl-Anthony Towns. I think they were geared up last year to beat Denver, and they did that. And I think Towns was a big part of that, especially in that playoff series. I think this year's team is better geared to beat Dallas, even though they didn't do it the other day, and to beat Oklahoma City. So I'll be curious to see what this matchup looks like tonight with no Towns available to guard Nikola Jokic.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
It's Wild Hockey time on Daily Delivery. Sarah McLellan from the Star Tribune joining me right now. Sarah, I've said this a couple times on the show. You're probably covering the hottest team in town right now, 6-1-2, coming off a pretty impressive 5-1-1 road trip, including some pretty impressive wins. I didn't see it coming. I don't know if a lot of people did, but this has been a pretty impressive start, and it hasn't been just one thing so far that's been going right for the Wild.
No, it has been a lot of factors, obviously, at play for them to get off to such a great start. The way I look at it is it really looks like they've passed kind of their first big significant test of the season, which was this really long road stretch. And, you can look back to the beginning. If you remember, it started the third game of the season, the team going into Winnipeg, obviously a division rival, a team that's been a tough matchup for this team in the last few years. And they didn't have Jared Spurgeon. They didn't have Joel Eriksson-Ek. And it kind of felt like maybe this was the beginning of, what happened at the start of last season when they were really challenged with injuries. And then there was all, the salary cap issues of, making sure they had enough players to fill out their roster. And it kind of did have the potential to be like, here they go again, kind of falling into the same adversity as last season. But they didn't. And I think it did start with that effort against the Jets, a 2-1 overtime loss. But on the second half of a back-to-back, missing 2 key players, it was a real gutsy effort. And I think that really ended up setting the tone for that, so far early season defining stretch of games. They go into St. Louis then. We all remember the goalie goal from Philip Gustafson.
Right.
They got a few days to reset. And then it was this 5-game trip that really, I think, a lot of their early season successes, that win against Florida, the defending, Stanley Cup champions, them going on the streak, the second longest streak to start a season in NHL history without trailing in regulation.
Right.
And I think too, just the performance of Kirill Kaprizov really emerging league-wide as the superstar that, the Wild know him to be. So you're right, it's kind of a lot of factors at play, but that's kind of how the Wild are constructed to have success. It usually just isn't one factor at play. It's multiple, and they're getting those contributions throughout the lineup. This road trip obviously was a big catalyst. And now they get to return home for a few games and back on the road. So, like I said, I think this was the first early test they aced, but there's going to be many more to come.
You mentioned Kaprizov, 18 points in 9 games. That's a nice understatement. That's a nice pace. Is he playing that much better or just producing at a higher level than he had before?
Yeah, I think early the production is obviously higher than we're used to seeing. There's always this talk about him being a slow starter. Obviously that doesn't apply this season whatsoever. I think what's interesting is he's really kind of, I think, found himself more in the playmaker mode so far this season. Usually it's him setting up or Matt Zuccarello setting him up for goals, and now he's the one who's kind of passing off. And I think, that maybe a perfect example of that was last game in Pittsburgh, and he finds Zuccarello, at the net front for a key goal for the team. I think that just speaks to, the variety of his skill set, and we've seen it, and I think we, those that watch him regularly know it. It's not just the shot, it's not just the pass, it's the vision. The awareness, how he's able to log so many minutes, be in every key situation, and just kind of have that competitiveness, that physical edge too. He really is a multifaceted player, and I think that's clearly been on display so far this season. Now at the level that he's at, to be near the top of the league and scoring, we'll see if that continues, but I don't think that's, a competition, so to speak, or a conversation or company that he doesn't belong in. I think that for the Wild to have success, clearly he needs to be at the best of his game, and he is so far. And if this is a team that stays competitive, stays in pursuit of a playoff position, and if he is a very big part of that, I just see the attention growing for him. And maybe this is that type of season where he gets more, MVP talk, or just kind of makes more of a case for how really valuable he is to this franchise. Maybe more people start to take notice.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, a guy who's obviously been important to them over the last, several years, spanning a lot of different regimes, coaching staffs. Jared Spurgeon, obviously he had that early injury that you talked about. How does that play out over the course of time here? Because he's only played in a couple games, right?
Yeah, I think it's something that's probably just going to have to be monitored, and kind of a wait and see situation for him. The injury obviously was related to the surgeries he had earlier this year. He went for hip and back surgeries that were season ending, obviously, for last season. And so I think this is kind of new terrain, but it's part of the process of working back. And, obviously there's recovery and rehab and all the off-season training, but then to get into the rigors of a schedule, to get into playing every other day type of situation, this is the first time he's really testing that. So I think it is kind of just a wait and see how he goes, really monitoring, this type of situation for him. But he played in return for the end of the trip. He played in Pittsburgh after not playing since the second game of the season. All indications he came out of that game fine, was back on the ice Thursday for practice. So, it is a situation, I think, again, that they'll probably just have to keep an eye on. But the fact that the team was able to persevere, whereas last season when he was hurt, again, that was kind of really the beginning of the end, so to speak, for the Wild, and the struggles. They weren't able to overcome them, and they fell into that early hole, and it really kind of set the tone for that season. It's a little bit of a different story, this year, and I think that shows their depth on defense. Younger players getting older, like Brock Faber, the role he's been able to take on, but two, probably just the muscle memory too, and learning the lessons from last season. This does seem to be a group that, is more poised and experienced, and just kind of gelling at the right time right now.
When they have gotten in trouble this season, it seems like their goalies have done a much better job of bailing them out. Gustafson's been terrific. The last game, their only loss of the year, only regulation loss of the year notwithstanding. Fleury gets his, huge homecoming in Pittsburgh. I mean, in this league, we can analyze all we want. Sometimes it comes down to, does the goalie stop the puck or not? And they've done a much better job this year. So it feels more like 2 years ago than it does last year at this point.
Totally. Their goaltending has been better. And, like you said before, the 7-5 loss to Philadelphia on Saturday, Philip Gustafson had almost been airtight. He had been one of the top goalies in the league, stopping almost everything, that was thrown on his net. I think, too, this is kind of indicative of them just really gelling more in John Hine's system. And it makes a lot of sense because, when he came in last November, he comes in on the fly. There's instruction, and he is obviously trying to put his stamp on the team, but they don't have the concerted practice time to, learn that and really get reps with it like they did in training camp this year. And the way they're playing now, it's not dissimilar from what he stressed last year. He wanted quick outs, get out of the zone, transition up ice quickly, and really kind of alleviate defense by playing offense. And I think that's what this team has really succeeded at so far this season is, they don't give up much. Their goaltending has been steady, but the number of shots, the quality of shots, they just aren't giving up as many dangerous looks, it seems, as they have in the past. And so that's been they've then been able to play more offense. They've been able to get out of their zone. They're not constantly under pressure. When they are, they've been able to get the saves most of the time when they need them. But I think this is just, showing that training camp was key for this team. Obviously, it was very intense, and there was, a lot made about them getting off to a good start because of how last season began. So I think we're seeing part of that, but also too, we're seeing now almost a year with John Hine at the helm and them really, finding out and knowing where they need to be on the ice, how they need to play. Now it's almost second nature. They know where each other is going to be rather than a year ago where there's a little bit of, a learning curve and feeling out process with someone new in charge. So I think that's also what's helping them too in their own end. They're getting better goaltending, but they're just not as porous as they were a year ago.
Now that we've seen his system for, almost the better part of a year, and you've seen him go through a full camp, what's fundamentally different between what he wants them to do and what Dean Evason was asking them to do?
I don't think there's too much different in terms of the stylistic, because I think with Evason in charge too, they wanted to be a fast group. They wanted to get up ice quickly, which I think is a big tenet of Hine's system as well. But I think it's the execution just that we're seeing differently. And again, I think that goes back to the understanding of players know now where they need to be. And maybe it is just a simple mental reset. Someone new comes in,
different voice. Yeah,
exactly. It's not like they're reinventing the wheel. There's only so many ways, right, to strategize in the game. But, you get that fresh start with someone new, a new voice. But I really think that's what's showing this season is just the way that they understand, where they're supposed to be, where someone else is supposed to be. And so much so that I think it becomes apparent, like in the Philadelphia game when they're off. It is kind of jarring to see when they struggle like that, because they had gotten into an early season rhythm of just kind of being quick up ice. I mean, that's when you see like the slick give and goes, the passing plays with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, the support they're getting from the blue line, a Brock Faber, Jake Middleton stepping up, supporting the play, Jonas Brodin. It's just pretty to see. It's easy on the eyes. And I think that goes back to just the understanding and like almost the muscle memory now that they've accrued in playing together so long as a group, but also being immersed now in Hine's system for almost a year.
Final thing, Sarah, anytime a team has what I would consider a surprising start, I don't think I saw this coming. I think people maybe thought this would be a decent team, but certainly not one that jumped out so fast. The question then becomes, is this sustainable? Is this a team that we're going to see continue somewhere close to this pace? Is this sustainable to you?
Well, I think the way that they're playing, they found what works for them. So I think that's the key. If they can stick to that, this is clearly a style that works for them. You saw it in, I think maybe best in like those Florida Tampa Bay games where, they find a lead, they methodically build it. They really didn't, that game against Florida, their shooting percentage was outrageous. Like the opportunities they had, they made them count. So is this a team that, is just going to run up the score and just, take care of the opposition that way. Maybe not. They seem like they have to be more methodical and precise in what they do. That's not to say they don't have, the offensive juggernauts up front and Kaprizov and Zuccarello to lead the offense. But I think if they can be that tactical and smart, clean up their own zone, get out of their zone quickly, I think that could be sustainable for them. Will that translate to wins against every opponent in the league? TBD, probably not, but it works for them. And I think the more they do it, like I said, muscle memory comes to mind. Like the more they do that and play that way, it really looks like this is the blueprint that works for this group as is. The way that they are, the lineup they have, they need 4 lines going. They're starting to get more contributions from their depth, the 3rd and 4th lines. Clearly they have a superstar up front in Kirill Kaprizov, but it really takes them playing as this 5-man unit in front of their goaltender. And when they do that, they've shown they can be a tough matchup for teams.
Back home, like you said, Friday night, Sarah will have the coverage. Follow that, Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. Sarah, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
Great stuff from Sarah, and I think what she said at the beginning about Kaprizov was a good point. He's got 13 assists, 5 goals, 18 points in 9 games this season. I feel like he's gotten some of his national due, but I always feel like he's kind of lumped into that second tier of players. You got the superstars of the NHL, and then there's kind of this next wave, and that's where people put Kirill Kaprizov. To her point, is this the year where he jumps up an echelon, where he gets the more of the respect that his play should suggest he gets? Will the Wild have a good enough season that he gets some of that acclaim? I'll be interested to see that, because I think he's having the sort of year so far that would dictate that. Good timing for it if you're Kirill Kaprizov, too, because he's going into an off season where he'll just have one more year on his contract after this one. Could cash in with a pretty big payday if he does indeed make another leap in his game. Let's finish with the cooler. Amazon Prime Video was dogging the Jets all game last night, just showing montages of bad plays, making fun of going into the darkness, and then look what happens. The Jets come back. They have 3 touchdowns in the second half. Garrett Wilson makes an unbelievable one-handed, toe-tapping, shin-down catch in the end zone. One of the best catches you'll ever see. Go check that out. Jets beat the Texans. They improved to 3-6. I'm not counting them out. Right now. I think Aaron Rodgers still has a tiny bit of magic left. I don't think they're going to make it all the way back from 2-6, but I would not count them out right now. I would not make fun of them. Don't poke the bear if you are anybody else in the AFC. That will do it for me today. Good stuff coming up next week. Royce on Monday, of course. Plenty of other things as well. Until then, I am Michael Rand, back at it again in a little while.